And we are live. Hello, folks. This is Ruben Dua from the Connection Loop podcast. Today, I am here with Vince Warnock, and we're going to get into this idea of how becoming an author can actually 3x your earnings and just generally your influence. So, Vince, you told me a really interesting story, and I think it's a great way to kick this off. Is that the amount of money that you were charging to speak at events was a certain amount, and then you wrote a
Yep.
book, and then it was another amount. So
Yeah.
guide us through this process. Also, if you don't mind, just start with a short bio, and
Yeah,
let's get
sure.
into this.
Look, I'm what I call a multi-hyphenate entrepreneur. So I have many different things that I do. I own a publishing company. I run a top 2% podcast, and I help a lot of people with marketing. My background is so varied, it's unbelievable. I studied electronics and computer and software engineering, got into marketing, got recognized for my experience in marketing, and created and sold a number of businesses. But then I found myself, once I sold our previous startup, which was a multi-8-figure exit after about probably 3.5 years of a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, I joined the team at Cigna Insurance and became the chief marketing officer there. And one of the things when you're in that kind of role is it's pretty much the dream job. And for 5 years, I was there getting the results, getting the recognition, getting the extreme amount of pay. Like when you're a Fortune 100 CMO, you get a lot of money and a lot of bonuses, and getting the recognition. Basically got rewarded by Adobe as one of the top 50 marketers in the world, and published my first book when I was there. And I say all of that because none of it mattered. I was miserable. Hated my time there. Not anything to do with the company or the team or anything like that, just because I wasn't being authentic to myself and needed to get back to my roots and what fulfills me, which is helping people, which is why I do what I do now. And the story you refer to, man, I'll actually take it back a step earlier. The journey to becoming an author actually started with a number of things. It actually started when I was 7, and a teacher of mine tried to tell me that because they were trying to analyze my handwriting and wondered why I had like capital letters in the middle of words, even though I knew all the rational rules for capitalization. So her conclusion, because she's a terrible teacher, was that I was retarded. And that's what she told me and told my parents. This is back in the 70s. And that was devastating for me. And she said, you're never going to be able to write properly. And I don't like being told I can't do something. That makes me really irritated. I really want to prove them wrong. So I did. Turns out that I wasn't retarded. I was actually just quite intelligent. And my brain was, thinking 5 paragraphs from now in my hand, because we did handwriting back then. We didn't have computers, just couldn't keep up with where my brain was at. So I had to learn to adapt to that and slow down. Anyway, fast forward a number of years, and a friend of mine he ran an advertising agency up in Auckland. He was moving to New York to set up an agency there and a startup there. And he said, look, I'm coming through, Vince, going to team up with you in Wellington. We'll grab a few beers, or quite a few beers, sit down and say goodbye. And I said, yeah, sure. And then halfway through the conversation, he dropped like this bombshell on me. He said, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I published my first book. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the greatest news ever. Why did you not lead with this? Like, I need to get a copy of the book. And he goes, oh, no, I wouldn't bother. It's rubbish. And I thought he was being a typical Kiwi, just going, we play ourselves down and we're all like, oh, it doesn't matter what my accomplishment, the humble brag. It's not that great, But actually what it was a social experiment. And he said to me, I wanted to prove something, because he had a lot of clients who wanted to become authors. He said, I wanted to prove that when you're a published author, people take you more seriously than before you were. And he said, so the book was this thing he cobbled together. And like, seriously, I understand why he said it was rubbish. It's not rubbish, but it was hilarious. So he put this book out there, and I said, well, what was the result? And he said, far more than I expected. Like, it's incredible the credibility it gives you and the doors it'll open. Now, I did the same as any time I heard another author say those things. And probably what all of you are doing right now when you hear that, I think to myself, oh yeah, he's exaggerating the results of that. But I was determined I was going to become an author. So I wrote my book, published my book, and I can tell you now, they were playing it down. The moment I published that book, everything kind of opened up and shifted for me. So prior to being a published author, I was charging, I think I said, I was charging about $3,000 to $5,000 to do an opening keynote at a conference, which is some pretty good money, when you're traveling the world. And I thought that was pretty good. When my book came out, I ended up in a bidding war with about 4 different conferences around the world that were all on around the same time. My fee went up to $20,000, and it stayed there. I ended up with, because I charged $20,000, a lot of people were like, well, that's your rate, we'll charge you that. So that was an immediate response where I at least 3x my income from doing keynote speaking. But the other thing that happened, and this is the bit that people don't really understand about this, is that doesn't stop there. So I had, and unfortunately, this is just pre-COVID, end of 2019, I had a conference reach out to me in San Diego and said, look, I'm based in New Zealand. They said to me, hey, look, Vince, we want you to do an opening keynote for us. We heard you at such and such conference. You're amazing, blah, blah, blah. We can't afford your fee. If we pay your $20,000, we won't be able to get some of the other speakers that we want to get there, and we want to get a range of speakers. However, we want to look after you, which was an interesting comment. They said, so first of all, we've got a travel budget. So we want to fly you, business class from New Zealand to San Diego. And I'm going, 17-hour flight in business class. I'm intrigued. And then they said, we'll put you up in a 5-star hotel. And we go, this is great. They said, but we also have a budget set aside for our attendees. And what we'd like to do is buy 5,000 copies of your book and give them away to every single person that comes into the conference. And then, by the way, we're going to set you up with an area where you can do book signings, and people will come to you and you can sign the book for them and everything. And I did a quick mental calculation. I'm going, hold on. So first of all, instead of $20,000, I'm getting $5,000 fee, a business class, 5-star hotel, and now they're buying 5,000 copies of my book. I'm now making more money than I would have from my standard fee, and they're getting my book in the hands of people who are my direct target market. And to make it even better, I'm now going to sit there signing the book for these people, building a rapport with them who are all potential clients of mine. It was an absolute dream. Unfortunately, COVID hit the world and the entire conference got cancelled. So there went that opportunity. But those are some of the things you do not count on when you become an author. And that's not even things like using your book as a lead magnet. It's one of the most effective lead magnets I've ever seen. You can generate so many leads from it.
Well, there's this idea that corporate gifting is one of the most effective forms of sales and marketing, just because it builds that rapport. I don't want to sound negative, but sometimes there's almost a subtle obligation that the person has to send you an email to thank you for it. And that's not why we should do it, but it sort of just inadvertently happens. And I think that if that gift happens to be a book that you wrote to help them solve a problem that they have, all of a sudden there's massive amounts of connections that are taking place here. So that's tremendous.
Yeah, like you said, you've got the reciprocity kicking in there. So they feel their obligation to reach out to you. Plus, you're adding value to them. Don't underestimate that. The moment you add value to them, they've immediately, we talk about the know, like, and trust factor as entrepreneurs. We need to build that know, like, and trust factor. You've immediately gone past trust and like and know. And you're in that area where they feel like that connection is to you. But the other thing there is you're also gifting them something that's adding value to them and is positioning you as a thought leader. I mean, that is an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, that's incredible. So take us through the book. Walk us through it. Give us enough of a teaser so that we want to run to the bookstore or Amazon and grab a copy.
Oh, man. Anytime people ask me about my first book, I'm like, oh, no, don't go there. It's always one of those things where I'm embarrassed by my first book, even though, honestly, it was a bestseller and I get a lot of accolades for it and everything. That book was about experimentation. That was one of the things that was really important to me in each of my startups was bringing this experimentation framework in. So in other words, giving you the chance to test and learn from everything and get that. Like everyone was looking for the step jump. Every startup I talked to, they're looking for what's the one thing that's going to get us from here all the way up to here. And I'm like, no, this is the wrong approach. Let's take a Kaizen approach. Let's actually look at continual small jump improvements, like just 1% improvement every single day. And before you know it, you've gone from here way up to here, past all of your competitors while they're trying to look for that one silver bullet. So that was what the book was about. I wrote it in 3 parts. The first part was very much the framework that I use. It's called the Chaser method. So it's taking you through this 6-step process to actually bring experimentation to life. Second part of the book was the mindset required for that, because understanding experimentation and successfully implementing it are 2 very different things. So I wanted people to get the right mindset behind this, like cultivating curiosity, dealing with resilience and things, and actually building the right mindset and bringing the other people on board with you in your organization. And then the third part was literally practical experiments from me. I picked 3 other digital marketers around the world who were experts in their field and said, look, can you contribute some experiments as well? Which they were happy to do so. So that was the first book. I've written many since then. I'm doing a lot of books on things like AI and ChatGPT at the moment because I'm doing a lot of testing in that area and seeing the potential for, oh my goodness, for authors, for entrepreneurs, for everything. It's just so exciting.
Well, I mean, speaking of, let's connect writing a book and AI, because I think that's a very common theme right now. There's on the Dub platform, we built a pretty rigorous AI integration.
Yeah,
We call it IRA, the Interactive Reaction Assistant, and it's
I
very
love
it's
that.
very effective because it can help you write something from scratch, but it can also help you rewrite something. So one of the things that we do quite often is that we'll take a YouTube video and
Yeah,
we'll upload that video into Dub, and then we'll download the transcription in text, and then we'll ask our AI engine to rewrite that. And
no,
if you put those dots together, you can start to realize that you can actually write a book from videos that you've recorded in the past. Now, I'm not saying that AI is going to replace human beings in the writing process. We must have the human element here. We must go through those proper channels, but
yeah.
at least it's a starting point. Could you
Oh,
respond to that?
Oh, absolutely, man. I'm like, people are surprised by this because I run a publishing company. So everyone's like, oh, no, no, no. Books should never use AI to help you write a book. No, that's ridiculous. It's got to be that human touch. I say wrong. I call BS on that. And if you use AI in the right way, it's going to fast track the work you're doing. And that's the key. So we use AI. I teach a lot of people to use AI for ideation. So, for example, when you're looking at structuring your book and you're thinking you've got a clear kind of direction in your mind of what you want to include, but there's always that little doubt going, what else should I put in there? Is there anything missing from this? So actually using AI to structure your book and saying, hey, look, give me an outline of a book around this specific topic, around these kind of things. I want it in this kind of style. Often it'll come back with some stuff and you go, that doesn't really fit. But there's usually something there where you go, oh man, I wouldn't have thought of that. And including that in your book is going to give your book that extra edge. The other thing too is we use it for creative block. So a lot of times authors suffer this thing called blinking cursor syndrome, where you're sitting in front of the computer, you know roughly what you want to say, but you're finding it really difficult to articulate something. So you're trying to explain a principle, and no matter how you write it, it just feels wrong. Well, use an AI tool, use Open Assistant, use ChatGPT, use Bard, use Claude, whatever it is. Just put your content, just copy and paste that in there and say, look, can you rewrite this and explain it back to me? And often it explains back what you're trying to say in a way that you were really trying to articulate. So you can take the output of that and rewrite it in your own words. But the reason that I think that AI is never going to replace authors, and that's why it's going to be a tool that we can use, is because if you think about what makes a book a good book, there are two things involved, right? It's not just the content of the book. That's part of it. But there are two other things. One of them is the credibility of the author, right? And they know, when someone reads a book, they're always that process they're going through thinking, should I pay attention to this? Does this resonate with me? Is this actually something that is accurate? Whereas if it comes from someone like yourself, Ruben, where they go, well, obviously Ruben knows what he's damn well talking about. This must be a good book. So immediately that trust factor is involved there. AI can't do that. You can use AI to help you, but it really can't replace that trust factor. But the other element that's missing from AI is the personal stories. And this is a lot of the work I teach a lot of the authors that come through our publishing company is, when you're structuring, like we get them to structure their whole book. We say, all right, here's the different chapters. Here's the key points under each of these chapters that you need to get across. But then when you're looking at those key points, and they're literally just bullet points under each chapter, what I get them to then do is say, have a look at that. And that could be all helped with AI, but have a look at that now. And what are the personal stories? What are the things that you can use to illustrate that point or to drive that point home or to bring it to life? Because when people read a book of facts, it's just a book of facts. If you want them to retain that information and connect with what you're writing, personal stories is the only way to go. And the reason for that is there's a whole pile of neuroscience around it. But when you're reading a story that somebody else has written, something happens with your brain. So if I give you a list of facts and I say, here's 10 facts, when your brain processes that information, your neurons are firing very different from the person that wrote down those facts. The person that wrote the facts is activating different areas of their brain, different neurons are firing. Yours is in an informational process where it's just in the neocortex going, okay, this is where, and you're trying to work out whether you should store that information. However, when you're sharing a story, the person that wrote the story and the person that's reading the story, and they've done this, they've put fMRI machines on both people's heads, and they've discovered that the neurons fire in the same sequence, meaning the person that's reading your book is going through the same journey that you went through writing the book. When you're telling that story, they're feeling that story and they feel that connection to you, but they also put themselves in that scenario, which means what you're teaching them is going to drive home so much better and they're going to retain it even more. So that's something that AI cannot do, but AI can help you with the rest of that book. And that's why I'm so excited about the potential for this, because a process that's taken some people a year to write a book can now take 3 months or even less. And I've had authors that come to us that write their book in 1.5 months or 1 month. So this fast tracks that entire process.
This is such an interesting thing. We love to talk about this idea of the story arc in every aspect of communication. The story arc is such an interesting thing if you study it, because there's a couple of things that always occur. In fact, in one of my favorite books on story is called Story by Robert McGee, and it has this premise. I think it's a little bit more script based or Hollywood based, but the premise is that quite often in a story, a hero goes on a journey or a stranger comes into town. And there's always some sort of a catalyst moment. There's some sort of a journey. There's some sort of a low point. There's some sort of a resolve. And then there's some sort of a evolution of the story, and it can end or it can continue on. And when you really study this idea of story, you realize that you can apply it to every aspect of your communication, even sending a video message out to someone on an email, or even picking up the phone in 2 minutes, even on a cold call. So my question for you, Vince, is how can we become better storytellers? How can we practice that muscle and actually become more interesting and fire those neurons in the way that you mentioned?
I love this story, man. This question, sorry. One of the things that I do is a thing we call the beats method. And this is what I get anyone who comes through to me, even on the marketing side of the business and things like that, or on the publishing side of the business. I get people to go through this beats method. And essentially what it is
and what is the acronym?
It's not actually an acronym. It's just called the beats method. So as in, like, that's the one, like a drum beat.
Okay,
and the reason for that is what you're going to do is you're going to map out your life, and you're going to map out key events and key stories that have happened to you. And the reason you're doing this, so you basically write all these things down, and be very warned when you do this, it can be quite confronting. Like I've had some of my students come through, and some of the people I work with, one of them went for a walk. She messaged me and said, just to let you know, I'm going for a walk while I think through the beats method, and then replied with, you bastard, because she knew it was going to be really difficult to deal with. But the reason for that is you're mapping out all of these key stories that happen to you. You're writing them all down as just basically bullet points of your life. Then what you're doing is you're next to it, you do it in like a spreadsheet. Next to it, you're writing in another column, am I comfortable sharing that story? And sometimes that's a yes, sometimes that's a no, sometimes that's a not right now. And that's fine. And then after that, you're going to write down what was the shift that happened to me because of that story. What was the lesson that I learned, or what changed in me? And that becomes, there'll be a number of different things. So for example, I talk about a story of a bully that I had when I was 11 and 12. And he made my life miserable because I grew up in a really abusive home. So home was not a safe space for me. School was my safe space. Then suddenly I had a bully at school. So now I had no safe space. So my life was like, for 2 years, I just didn't want to live. It was horrible. And then I used that story to illustrate what shifted in me. Which shifted in me was not wanting to be a victim anymore, actually taking control of my life. The fact that he went to another school, so I was now free of that. But then he transferred back to my school. And this is like every terrible 80s movie. And I say terrible for a reason. Like age 13, I went to one school, he went to another. I'm like, yeah, I'm free of my bully now. Then age 17, he came back to my school, and I'm like, damn it. But by this time, I was no longer a victim. I had learned how to defend myself. I threw myself into boxing, martial arts, and a whole pile of stuff. And I go, this is finally, like every movie I watched as a kid, the underdog, the nerd is finally coming out on top on the jock. I'm finally going to get my revenge on him. So he comes past me at school, and he didn't even see me. He just wanders past, and I yelled out his name, and then a few expletives, of course. Then he turned around, and just like he always did, he kind of waddles over to me, and he took a swing, and I'm like, no. Moved out of the way, and he took another swing, and I'm like, no. And then finally, I did it. I laid him out. I hit him. He went down. He was out for the count. And that moment I'd seen in every 80s movie where finally you've got that triumph and that victory, except I felt terrible. I felt absolutely horrible. And I'm looking at this guy on the ground going, well, I thought that would feel amazing. It does not. And then I find myself in the principal's office, and principal's talking to me, and he said, look, Vince, do you know why he transferred to our school? And I'm trying to be staunch. I'm like, I don't care. I really don't care. And he goes, you should care. I went, oh. And he goes, I'm going to tell you about this kid's life. And he said he grew up in an environment where his father brutally beat his mother, his sister, and him every day since he was a baby. Right? Every day, this guy, when he was at home, all he faced was brutal assault. The father beat the mother so badly in front of those two children that she lost her life. He basically murdered the mum in front of the 2 kids. So now they've gone to move in with their auntie and uncle. He's gone to jail, rightfully so. And now they've transferred to this school. And all of a sudden I had this huge knot in my stomach. And I'm like, well, I didn't know that. And he goes, well, I didn't expect you would know that, Vince. But of all the people that could possibly have understood what he's going through and all the people that could possibly have been there for him, I kind of thought you might have been one of those. And that was a point where, see, something shifted in me and I learned I had no idea about this guy's life, right? I had no idea. I also realized, by the way, I'm not the hero of the story. I'm the villain in the story. I'm the person that had the opportunity to help someone and I turned it down just for my own pleasure. So that shifted something in me where I realized I have to get super curious about people. So in the Beats method, when I highlight that as a bullet point, I write down that I learned to be inherently curious about people. I also learned in there about vulnerability. I also learned in there about not being a victim. And I write down all these themes. So if for every one of these beats that you go through, you write down those themes. And the reason you do that is when I'm on a show and someone says to me, hey, Vince, we want you to talk about curiosity. Then in my mind, I've got all these different beats and a number of those have the theme of curiosity. So I can talk about curiosity from my experience and bring it to life with those stories. And it's kind of like basically crafting a melody. I'm going, what are the different beats that are in there? What are the, what we call the beats? And then what are the atomic beats? So that's, in other words, the epiphany that I had. What is that beat that made me shift my perception on that? And in that case, that was that story. So that's how you kind of get better at storytelling, is actually understanding your life, looking at all the different examples, understanding the how they shifted you, what effect they had on you, and then being able to articulate those to people in a way that really impacts them. And part of the way we do that, you talked about the story narratives, like the monomyth, which is the hero's journey that you talked about. One of my favorite storylines ever. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'm a huge Marvel fan. Most of those are the monomyth journey. However, there are other narrative styles you could study. One of them is called in medias res, which is, you see this a lot with cheesy action films, and I love these. Starts off with a guy standing there, and there's about 20 people with guns faced on him, and he's like, so how did I get here? And you realize it started in the middle of the story. Then it goes all the way back to 5 days earlier, and you're tracking out his life. So you already know where the story's heading, but you've got to piece it all together. That's an incredibly powerful story mechanism as well. So there's a lot of different narrative styles you can study and ways you can bring this to life as well.
Yeah, I think this is such an important thing as we start to think about what is it that we can write about? What's our book?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that one of the favorite questions that we all get? What is the title of your next book? And I think the reason why this is very interesting and very applicable here is because, as you were telling me your story, I felt like I was on that journey with you. I could see you, and I could see myself in you, and I could connect to you, and I was feeling this relationship with you, and I was feeling, massive amounts of empathy and curiosity and trying to truly understand what is it that you went through. And ultimately, the reason why I really like the way in which you told this story is because you might not be the hero or the villain in this story. You actually just might be the guide, and you might help me on how I can overcome something like that in my life. By hearing what you went through in your life. I don't see you as the villain. I just see you as a human being that was vulnerable and trying to, deal with reality at a young age. And I respect that. And I think it's so important that people remember that you said the word, which is vulnerability. And, talk to me about how we can feel more comfortable being vulnerable, because if you see a keynote speech, if you read the intro to a book, the best one to read is, I used to be terrible, and I went through this, and it was awful, and I was on my deathbed, and now I'm here. Zero.
There is a limit to that, though, which is hilarious, because and this is, sharing vulnerability is well, it makes us vulnerable, so therefore we always kind of steer away from it. But first of all, the power of vulnerability is really important. So we talked about know, like, trust earlier. The reason we talk about that is because of the way the brain works, right? So we're dealing with people's decision-making process. When anyone's dealing with you, they want to know, do I want to do business with this person? So to do that, there's 3 parts of the brain that are activated. There is the reptilian brain, which is the defensive brain. There is the neocortex, which is the logical brain. And there's the limbic system, which is the emotional brain, essentially. So the neocortex is the facts. It is the features, the benefits, all those kind of things. The limbic system is the stories. That is where we bring it to life. But the reptilian brain is the part of your brain that doesn't make a decision, but it opts out of a decision. So in other words, it's that little kind of niggle that you get on the inside where you're like, oh, this doesn't feel right. This person seems a bit creepy, or should I trust them? I'm not sure. And if your reptilian brain's activated, it's going, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this. I don't want you making a decision on it. One of the easiest ways we deal with this, and in marketing, we deal with this really well. We do things like testimonies, social proof, all those kind of things. But one of the most powerful ways is to share vulnerability. Because the moment you are vulnerable to the other person and you're telling them a story that includes a vulnerability, their reptilian brain goes, oh, wait a minute, this must be a safe space. If they're open to sharing that vulnerability, then obviously this is a safe space for me to be open. So therefore, I'm not needed right now. And it goes in the corner and sits in fetal position or has a coffee or whatever, and it's not involved in the decision process. So it's a really powerful way of connecting with people. But how far do you go? And this is where you've got to factor in a few different things. First of all, you've got to be comfortable sharing that vulnerability. And a good measure, and I can never remember, it's always accredited to so many different people. Some people say it was Oprah Winfrey, and some people say it's Mark Twain, all these kind of things. But they say you don't share the wounds, you share the scars. In other words, if you're going through something right now and you are in a vulnerable state right now, it's probably not a good idea to share that with people. Because you're still dealing with that. However, if you've gone through something where you're incredibly vulnerable, you've come out the other side, you've got the scar tissue as a result of that, you've learned so much from it, sharing that vulnerability could help that other person who's going through the same thing as you. However, there is also another line you need to make sure you don't cross. And I've seen this at a conference. It was so bad, Ruben. Honestly, I was super embarrassed for the guy. He got up there and he tried to be vulnerable with everyone. He goes, look, I was a jerk and I used to be a real jerk to my wife and I'd give her a slap every now and then. And I'd be like, oh, and he was swearing his head off at his wife. And you're like, dude, like, I don't care what your transformation is. Right now, everyone in this room hates you. And they're all like, oh, you kicked her puppy as well. I'm like, you did the sacrilege. First of all, you hit your woman, which is unacceptable in any scenario. Secondly, you kick the puppy. I mean, come on. Like every villain in major movies, if they hurt a young animal, you immediately want them dead. So I'm like, dude, you have shared way too much of your personal story.
Hashtag John Wick.
Exactly. Or Guardians of the Galaxy 3, just saying, fantastic movie. So you've got to know where the line is on that. But you've also got to think through, what is the value of me sharing this part of my story? Because in his case, he was sharing that to talk about a sales technique. I'm like, dude, like this, nothing related to what you're talking about here. You're just trying to be vulnerable with people. It's backfiring. Whereas for me, if I'm teaching about curiosity, sharing that personal story that I shared before, where I learned the value of curiosity, is going to help others to learn the value of that as well. And in the way I tell that story is very specific. I tell that story from the point of view of going, hey, you know, it's around me being a victim, and everyone feels that, and they feel the pain that I went through and how horrible it was. And it was absolutely horrible. And then they get to the point where I'm finally going to come out on top, just like the 80s movies, which, by the way, every 80s movie lies to you. Just don't trust them. They're all wrong. But you get to that point where you feel that as well. And you're like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. And that horrible feeling that I then felt, you feel as well. So you actually learn that lesson without having to do what I did, without having to put yourself in that position. So by me sharing that vulnerability, I'm taking you on that journey and helping you to learn. So that's how you learn to know what to share when you're being vulnerable.
Well, okay, so this is interesting, because one of the things that I always have fun with is, it's like a saying that I have is, that's the title of my next book. And every time I come up with an acronym or something clever, I'm like, that's the title of my next book. And it's become a little bit of an inside joke. And because, you know, we're always trying to be creative. We're marketers. We come up with acronyms and cool names and stuff like this. But every once in a while, something sticks. And I realize, you know what, that is meaningful. And it allows me to go and tap into something deeper. And I think the filter that I have created for what is my next body of work going to be, whether it's a podcast like with you here, or it's a book, and it's this alignment, and it's who is my target audience? Okay. What is it that they're trying to solve? Am I qualified to talk about this? Do I have enough stories to make it interesting? You know, and then ultimately, am I going to be able to have the time and the resources to go through the process of actually getting it published in people's hands? Like, am I willing to make that investment? Yeah. Can you guide us a little bit on where we should put our flag in and just start?
Well, absolutely. Look, first thing I would say is there's different ways that you can become an author as well. And this is an important point, because there is a mentality, and most of you listening to this right now or seeing this are probably thinking to yourself, oh, I need to write my memoir or my biography or my magnum opus masterpiece of, creativity, blah, blah, blah. Or I need to be the absolute expert in my field to be able to write this book. But what they don't realize is there's multiple different ways a book can come to life. Like we talk about things like medium content books, like journals, planners. I put a book out called 5-Word Affirmations. It's about my journey on affirmations. Like basically someone said to me one day, the power of affirmations. And I'm like, I don't have time for that crap. I'm like, I'm not going to stand in front of the mirror and go, hey, Vince, you're awesome. And all this. I'm like, I've got far too many things to do. So they challenged me and they said, oh, didn't you write a book on experimentation, Vince? And here you are making a conclusion without trying something. And I'm like, oh, touche, damn it. So I said, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go on a 30-day journey of affirmations, right? So I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to journal everything I go through. I'm going to every day take this serious and do these affirmations. But I'm also going to study the neuroscience of it because I want to understand how this can affect the brain and if it does actually affect the brain. And basically I'm treating it as a pure experiment. I could prove this or disprove it. That 30 days has been ongoing for over 3 years now, for about 3.5 years. And that's because it worked. It worked really, really well. So what I did was I wrote a book, and I did the book so that I could teach people this, but also so that I could show people about medium content. So my book is about 35 pages of absolute writing. So this is me talking about my journey. This is me giving an overview of the neuroscience of it so people understand cognitive dissonance and how our cognitive biases play into this and that as well, how your brain processes these affirmations. The rest of that book, and it's a full-length book, every page is a 5-word affirmation that people can use. So it's a practical book to give people stuff that I've taught them. It's a fully credible book. It was a bestseller, put it out there, and yet it took me a week to write it. So that's one of the ways you can bring a book to life. The other ones are collaboration books. Like you said there, what if I'm not the expert on this? First of all, you're always more of an expert than you think you are because and people think I have to be, I have to have a double PhD in my topic or whatever. I have to be considered top of my game to be able to write a book. No, you just have to have gone through experiences and gone through your own learning. Because believe it or not, there are people out there. Like I just wrote 2 books on ChatGPT, right? There are people out there like, Sam Altman who are obviously he created ChatGPT. He's far more experienced in this. He should be the one writing all these books. I should not be writing books on this. Except for the fact that I use this every single day. I train these systems. I use them. I have local versions of them on servers here that I train up for various different purposes. So I have experience in this, and my unique experience and my unique way of telling people will resonate with someone far more than perhaps Sam Altman would. And there'll be others out there that resonate with Sam far more than they ever would with mine. So in other words, there are people out there waiting for you to show up and write your genius book, write your book about whatever topic it is. So that's something to consider. But also, if you're not an expert in your area, if it's something you're relatively new and you want to be known for that, consider doing a collaboration book, actually gathering a bunch of people who are experts in this and interview them. Talk to them about that. And you will be positioned alongside these experts in a book about your topic. And then there's repurposed books. This is the one that always cracks me up. Most people that come to us go, I'd love to write a book, but it's so much work. And I'm going, really? And we go through their content and realize they've got probably 10 books in them because they've already written all this for their clients. Or in some cases, I get a lot of podcasters who come to me saying, hey, I asked the same question of all my guests and I've interviewed like 200 people. I now have these answers from 200 different entrepreneurs. I'm like, hello, you've got like 10 books there. Come on. So that's a repurposed book. But then your genius book, the starting point for that, and you kind of alluded to it, is, often, particularly once you've written a book, by the way, you'll get the bug and you'll come up with 30 different book ideas. Just always write those down. Never lose those ideas. But if you want to know where to start, it's simple. Look at what you teach your clients now. Look at the areas that you help people get breakthrough and pick one of those that you have to do every single time. So for example, for me, I do a lot of work teaching people thought leadership. And part of that is we help them obviously become published authors. I help them to launch podcasts. I help them to get in PR. I help them to create merchandise, all the different things. And I realize there's these 13 pillars of perceived thought leadership. So often when I'm having a conversation with someone about becoming an author, I always start with, did you know there are so many different ways that you can become positioned as a thought leader? And these are the reasons why. And the most powerful of those is always becoming a published author. So what I'm doing is writing a book about that, so that I can give that book to them, so that I can help them with that one little piece And then they look at that and go, well, now I need your help on the rest of this, Vince. Now I need you guys to help me to bring my book to life, or to help me to launch my podcast or whatever. So there's so many different ways you can do it, but pick that area that you help so many people with, that you give them breakthrough, write that as your genius book. It doesn't take as long as you think. Honestly, most people get overwhelmed with the thought of writing a book, but once you have a simple framework, a simple way to approach it, you will get a book churned out in no time at all. I had one of our authors write for 8 minutes a day, and she had written a full book within 6 months. It was crazy.
Incredible. Yeah. Okay, so I am a first time author. I've never written a book before, which actually it was not true, because I have written one book. It's on Amazon. It's called Click Record. And it was all based on conversations from this podcast. But let's just pretend like I've never written a book before. Okay. And I've got a concept, and I want to pitch you, because you are a publisher. So I'm going to pitch you on this, and I would love to receive brutally honest feedback from you as to how I can go through the process of either continuing on the direction that I'm in, or going in a different direction, and eventually potentially, working a deal out with you and your publishing company. So ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. So one of the fields that I have studied extensively is this idea of the parasocial relationship. And the reason why I have done that is because I'm the CEO of a software company where people create these asynchronous videos. 70,000 people have signed up since we started, and we've seen, millions of videos get created with our software, where one person is communicating a message to another person asynchronously. And then as a result of that engagement, there is a relationship that's being created, a parasocial relationship. Okay. So this is what we study constantly. You mentioned know, like, trust. The biggest issue that we're all trying to solve in business is to get over the trust hurdle, whether it's with our prospects, or whether it's with our clients, or our employees, or our team members, our constituents, our partners. It doesn't matter. The biggest issue that we're all trying to deal with is how we can really build that familial trust with people. And then as a result, have massive amounts of productivity and happiness, comfort, right?
Yeah.
And, this book is going to be very story driven. So I want to share very specific stories.
Nice.
Seth Godin is a great influence of me. I love his storytelling. I love how he goes and finds folks, and he just shares their common stories, everyday people just like us. And he just shows how they went through this journey and what they did and how they took a risk and then got a reward, hopefully. So this is a story-driven book, but there's also going to be a lot of neuroscience, not geeky neuroscience, interesting neuroscience, so that we can actually understand how we can actually understand what things look like from other people's perspective, and how we can tap into this idea of empathy and putting other people first. I intend to market this to my community. So we have an email list of about 50,000 folks, and we want to email this to them and spend some money on advertising it and get it out there. And anytime I have a speaking engagement, I'd love to ask the organizers to buy a bunch of copies like you do. And I am looking for a publisher. So Vince, that was my pitch. What do you think?
Nice. Well, first of all, okay. It's one of those things where you literally pitch things that I'm super passionate about. So that always makes it very difficult, because I'm completely biased already. I love neuroscience. I'm obviously a storyteller by trade anyway. So I love storytelling, any story-driven kind of element of this. But also the parasocial relationships is something that genuinely fascinates me, because I look at pseudo-social as well. Things like my first ever girlfriend, which was Princess Leia. She may not have been real, and she may not have known I existed, but to me, she was everything in a woman. So it was just kind of crazy that I felt this super connection to something that doesn't exist. So as a topic,
that was tough competition for yourself.
Yeah, totally. So all of this is actually really resonating with me personally. Now, when you're looking for a publisher, one of the things I will say is you've got to match whatever it is that you're trying to tell with their expertise. And our publishing company, ATG Publishing, we're very much in the entrepreneurial space, very much aligned with marketing and things. So it does actually align with us perfectly. My question to you is, why are you writing this book? And there's no wrong answers to this. I always put this out there because everyone always says the same thing when I ask them that question. They go, I just want to help people. Of course you do, because you're an impact-driven entrepreneur. But there are other reasons you could write this book. One of them is to be able to make money from it. So in other words, use it as a lead magnet, use it as a way to drive new business for your organization. Another way is to position you as a thought leader. Another way is to use it to get booked on stages. Like, have you thought through the rationale behind
Yeah.
why you want to publish this book?
Vince, Mr. Publisher, the reason why I want to
Yeah.
write this book is because I want to make you way, way more rich than you already are.
Oh, I love the pitch. This is awesome. Yeah.
Okay, so here it is.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have struggled with in my life
Yeah.
is understanding fear. Okay, and when I say understanding fear, it's understanding the science of fear, but it's also how fear has consumed me and how fear
Yeah.
has held me back in so many aspects of my life. In my younger years, I had a very difficult time being vulnerable. I'm
Yeah.
a musician, I'm an artist, I write songs, I play a bunch of instruments. So I have this ability, I have this sort of artistic side where I find the need to express myself, but it took me a long time to get comfortable performing and singing and sharing stories and being on a stage and writing books and even doing videos like this. It took a lot
Yeah.
of practice. And I realized that, I was caged. I wasn't free in my life. And, every single day I meet someone that suffers from that. They're stuck in a cage. They are not free. They might know it or they might not know it. And the simplest statement that I hear from people, because I'm the CEO of a software company, is I don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable being on video.
Yeah.
And when I hear that statement, I want to help people in such a massive level. And I know that that's what people say, but I'm telling you, it's much more than that. We are going through an epidemic. We are going through a mental health epidemic in
Yeah, I
humanity.
agree.
And if we cannot get to a place where we can feel comfortable with ourselves, where we can understand fear, not overcome it because fear is healthy, but understand fear, then we can actually get to a really beautiful place of collective consciousness. The deepest place that I want to go is where we're all truly connected in the the unified field of consciousness. It's a very high level spiritual concept. I'm a very spiritual person, but we are at in between stage of humanity. And I think that the way that we're going to solve that is by connecting to other human beings.
Okay, I can tell you now that is exactly what I wanted to hear. And the reason for that is everyone listening to this and watching this right now and listening to the podcast and things, they're connecting with what you just said. They feel that. And like you said, you come across these people every single day. A huge chunk of them are probably listening to this right now. A lot of you out there are listening to this going, oh my goodness, Ruben, I need this. I need this help. The moment that people need what you're putting out there, that is when that book should happen, right? So for me as a publisher, that is the kind of thing, when we hear that, that's immediately a green flag going, hey, this needs to happen. This book needs to happen. So we need to bring this to life. So what we would do is immediately we would say, okay, first of all, yep, it would be an honor to work with someone like yourself. Secondly, we would get you to do an exercise that we get everyone to do, which is to sit down, take some time on this. Don't rush this, but sit down and go, okay, I'm going to picture what it's like when somebody has read my book, right? When somebody has gone through this entire book and they've read it, what do I want them to have thought? In other words, what do I want them to think? Right? When they get to the end of that book, what is their mental process going through? What are they thinking at the end of the book? Also, what do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do? Because you will have actions from that. And not just one action. It's not just be confident on camera. It might be actually taking the steps required, doing this or doing this. And you'll come up with a dozen different things you could put under the do. But the reason we do the think, feel, do part of that is because that's going to help you with the next phase, which is structuring that book. Because when you do that and you understand what you want people to think, you'll realize there are a huge amount of components that you need to include in this book to help them to think that or to feel that or to do that. And guess what those are? They're your chapters. So for you, when you're talking about this, parasocial relationship type thing, what's the first thing they need to do is they actually probably need to, even before that, they need to understand the power of what they're doing, but then they probably need to actually understand how to turn up on camera, or they need to understand how to get over fear and things like that. So all of these become elements within there. Those are your chapters. And then the rest of it is actually really easy, because the moment you do that, you've got a chapter. Say that chapter is on understanding what a parasocial relationship is. Then under that, what are the key bullet points that they need to know to be able to understand that? And that becomes the core components of that chapter. And then from there, that's when you go, now what are the stories that are going to bring it to life? Here we go. What are the personal experiences that I've had, or like Seth Godin does, somebody else like a client of his has had? What are some of those stories that are going to help to illustrate this, drive it home, and make this a book that people want to read? So yeah,
Tremendous.
great pitch. Yeah, great.
Tremendous.
Pitch.
That's really, really actionable feedback. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
One of the things that that I would love to incorporate into this book is I love the third act reveal. Like in
Yeah.
magic, they call it the prestige. And I love having something really special that we keep until the end that just people weren't really expecting. And
Yeah.
this is probably a little bit of a spoiler alert, but that's okay because I want people to know about really what the essence of what I'm talking about, which is self-love. It's
Yeah.
understanding childhood traumas and what we went through. I mean, Vince, you went through a lot as a young
Yeah.
person. You were bullied as a kid. You went and you were in an abusive household. I mean, that thank you for getting over your traumas, and thank you for figuring out a way to share your stories with us so that we could
Yeah.
help solve our problems and we can help solve our traumas. Maybe there's someone out there that has not yet solved their problem. Maybe they haven't spoken to anyone about an abusive situation that they've been in for decades or decades ago. And now finally they can get unlocked and they can realize, you know what? Maybe it's those most challenging situations in my life that make me who I am today. And I'm here because of them.
Absolutely. Oh
And I
my
don't
goodness,
want to say
man.
thank
Yeah.
you to the bullies and the people that hurt us because that doesn't sound right. It sounds patronizing, but at the
Yeah.
same time, we wouldn't be here, Vince. Where would you be if you didn't go through that?
No, exactly. And this was a really important lesson that I had to learn, Ruben. Like I still remember one of my first ever businesses failing miserably. I misread the market, I misread a whole pile of different things, and it just failed, and I shut it down. And I was having a pity party. I was feeling sorry for myself, and I'm like, oh, poor me, poor me. And I'm talking to a friend of mine, and I went into the victim role very, very quickly. And I remember saying to him, look, it's not fair. Other people have grown up in families where they learn these things, or they grow up in families where they have role models who can teach them aspects of business that I just failed at, and I didn't have a supportive network. I didn't have all this kind of stuff. And I was just, I could see that he was starting to get a bit irritated, the fact that I'm just moaning nonstop. But he turned around to me and he said, you do realize that everything you've gone through in life counts for something, eh?
Yeah.
And I didn't know what he meant at first, but he explained. He said, look, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he said, and I wouldn't wish the ugly on anyone. But all of those things that you've gone through have made you into who you are now. And he said, and I happen to think you're actually a really awesome human being. And that helped me to define myself as going, okay, I'm not defined by the things that happened to me. I'm defined by the fact that I went through that and who I am now. And those negative things, the bad and the ugly, help me to understand and have empathy for people that have gone through this. It helps me to help others go through this. But the other thing I would say there, Ruben, is you talked about, getting over your traumas. And this is a really interesting comment because it's a process. And yes, I went through a huge amount of trauma as a child and even as a young adult and things as well. And there are things that happen to me even now where they're traumatizing and you go through them. The fact is, it is a process. And I'm still, even now, I do a lot of deep work. I have a co-founder of mine who I confide in. She does a lot of work on EFT and tapping with me to actually unlock a lot of my past memories and things. And even recently, I dealt with an issue where, this is going to sound so random to all of you, I had a phobia of tissues. Right?
Oh.
And I'm talking tissues that you blow your nose on, right? Not dirty ones, just even clean tissues. If I pick them up, if I hold them in my hand, I would almost pass out. Like, we would go out, I'd go out with my wife and it'd be cold. I'd give her my jacket and she'd forget and put her tissues in the pocket. And then she gives the jacket back to me. I put my hand in the pocket, feel the tissues. And then honestly, I break out in a sweat. My heart starts racing. I can't breathe. And I feel like I'm going to pass out. And now that is random. And just to clarify, a phobia is literally an irrational fear. So there's nothing rational about this. But it didn't make sense to me. I'm going, I don't know why I'm afraid of tissues. I've never been abused by a tissue. I've never had a tissue inappropriately touch me, anything like that. I'm like, this makes no logical sense. But I knew I had to go through this and I had to understand why my brain was having this limitation. So actually going through it, we went and we were actually dealing with something else, and some memories came up about my brother. And I was in a kind of blended family. Like myself and my sister were fostered into our family, and then my sister got separated from me. Then they had 2 of their own kids, and then they adopted 3 other kids. One of those was my brother, and he was born with cerebral palsy. He was born with water on the brain, couldn't communicate. And I have very fond memories of my brother. Him and I were incredibly close. I was 17 when he passed away, and he was just one of those people where he couldn't talk, but him and I had this weird telepathic bond. Like I would look at him, he'd look at me, and we'd both crack up laughing. We knew what each other was thinking. It was just awesome. And I had those very fond memories, right? And losing him was very tragic for me, and it was very personal for me because I was so close. But I felt like I got over that. Wasn't until we went back to some memories that I remembered I started unlocking these things that I had packed away. And one of those was the fact that him having cerebral palsy meant that he couldn't break up the mucus in his own lungs, right? And my parents were absent. I mean, they were never at home anyway. So I took the role of caregiver for my brother. And I would have to do this massaging of him. I'd have to massage his chest and his back, break up the phlegm, and then, and this sounds disgusting, but honestly, when it's someone you love and it's saving their life, you don't feel like it's disgusting at all. And I had no trauma related to this. I would literally have to suck the mucus out of his nose and spit it into a tissue and put it next to me. And that was keeping him alive. And it was awesome because we had so many good memories. When he passed away, and he actually passed away in my arms at age 3.5, my brain protected myself and decided that I was only going to remember the good memories. I was only going to remember the times that him and I had our special bond. I didn't want to remember all the times that he was so chronically ill and we almost lost him and things. My brain couldn't deal with that. So it shut all of that away, locked it up, threw away the key, bolted up the door and everything. But going through doing that process of going through your trauma, and that was only very recently that I unlocked this, we realized what it was. I'll be honest, I cried for like 3.5 hours. And it was a flood of emotions, but it was so cathartic. And now my memory of my brother is even richer because I remember everything about my brother, and it's unlocked a lot of this, how special it was, that bond with him. So that's the kind of stuff I would say. Yes, going through your trauma, we can say getting over your trauma, but the reality is it is a long process. And things you feel like you're over, you'll suddenly find years later, it's like, well, I didn't really deal with that one as well as I thought I did. So I just encourage everyone to keep moving through that trauma as well.
Yeah. Go deep within. They say if you go within, then you can go up.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you're so right. There is just a huge mental health crisis in the world right now. And that's why, bringing it back to the book you're talking about there, I think any book that's going to help people with their confidence, any book that's going to help people to show up as they actually are, not as this, and not afraid and not hold back and not trying to be something they're not, but show up as their authentic self. I think that's going to have a huge impact on this world, which is why I would say genuinely, you have to write that book, man. It's compulsory now. You put it out there, people are going to expect it.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Look for Parasocial, the book by me, yours truly, in a bookstore near you. Well, listen, Vince, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. Where can people learn more about you? Give us your social channels, your website.
Sure.
How do you help people now? What is your purpose now? I'd love to learn more.
Oh man, my purpose now is visibility, and basically, I just want to help entrepreneurs be seen. And there are so many entrepreneurs out there that are just incredible human beings that really don't get the opportunities of others. So I want to elevate you above others, which is why I run my podcast. It's why I help people publish their books. It's why I help people with thought leadership, all of those kind of things. So best place to contact me is always.
Let's get a podcast plug, please.
Oh yeah, sure. Chasing the Insights. It is top 2% podcast in the world, which is awesome. And I just every day interview leaders like you, Ruben, like leaders in this world who are just incredible people who add value to entrepreneurs and to their journey. So you'll hear everything from nutrition experts to health experts to heart experts to mindset people to marketing specialists, sales people, anything that's going to help you to build your business, you will hear on the show. Now, all of that can be found at chasingtheinsights.com. That is the home of my podcast. It's the home of my personal books and things as well. But also you'll see links there to where you can connect with me on social. Highly encourage you to do so. I love meeting new people. People are my favorite thing in the world. So just connect with me everywhere. Or you can go to ATG Publishing. So that stands for All the Geek Publishing. So just go to atgpublishing.com. That is the home of our publishing company. We are a ghost publisher for some of the larger traditional publishers. So they give us their clients. We craft beautiful books. We publish them. They become a bestseller, and then we don't get any credit for them. But this year, we're actually going loud because we're very good at what we do. We're going very loud and bringing people onto what we call our imprint, which is our publishing company, so that they can get very accessible ways to become bestsellers in their industry.
Tremendous. Well, Vince, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you. I encourage people to go connect with you. ATGpublishing.com, chasingtheinsights.com. Vince, you were great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh man, it is an honor being here. I mean, just the fact that you and I get to catch up is always a lot of fun anyway, Ruben. You are genuinely somebody who is authentic. And like I said, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of different SaaS solutions before and a lot of different companies that are helping entrepreneurs. but yours is one of the few that actually have a genuine mission behind it to help people, and
Mm.
not just help them in their business, but help them with their confidence and with themselves. And I just really want to honor you for that. So it was a
Well, thank
no-brainer
you.
when we connected. I was like, man, we have to be on each other's shows. I just have to be in your world. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. No, it's been a tremendous journey, and there's this. I'll sort of end with this quick story, where in a previous business, I was running around town for a while trying to raise money from investors,
Yeah.
and if anyone has gone through that process, it's very, very taxing. It's a totally
Oh yeah.
mental health, just
Oh,
a
it halts
challenge,
your
right?
company as well. It's yeah, it's
Yeah.
horrible.
Because it's one thing to go through the process of raising money from investors, but on the other side of that, why are you raising money? Is it to probably pay your mortgage or your rent and to
Yeah.
put food on the table? There's a lot of challenges. There's this runway conflict, and I remember the feeling of enduring massive amounts of failure throughout this process and massive amounts of rejection. And I remember saying to myself at the end of the process, there's got to be a better way. I
Yeah.
am, and I made a commitment to myself. I said I'm never going to chase. I'm never going to chase. I'm going to attract people. I'm going to engage people, but I'm not going to
I love
chase
that.
people.
Yeah, I
And
love that.
and when I made that commitment to myself, all of a
Yeah.
sudden my whole world changed, because now I wasn't in that trauma cycle where I was constantly chasing acceptance,
Yeah.
maybe acceptance that I didn't receive at some other point in my life,
Yeah, no
and
doubt. Yeah.
that's another thing that you unpack, right?
Yeah.
That's trauma stuff, right? And if you sort of realize that, then you say, you know what? I don't have to chase anymore. I can be me. I can be authentic. I can talk to Vince. We can
Yeah.
create content. We can share stories, influence people. We can chase the insights together.
Yeah.
And as a result, people will want to gravitate towards us. And then, we gravitate towards them. And that's why we call it the Connection Loop podcast.
Absolutely. I love that, man. That is so
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. Thanks again, Vince.
Cheers.